you're really wondering who I am and what I do, I'm a lot of things. I'm a magician, I'm a storyteller, I'm a software architect, I'm a software engineer, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a magician, I'm a scuba diver, I'm a biker, I'm a road cyclist, I'm a writer, I'm a reader, I'm all of these things. I'm the union of all of these things. But, it's some of these, it's some of these things that, where I try to, for a living, excuse me, my brain just rebooted. I feel like I just heard the doo-doo-doo-doo. In fact, my most recent real job, my title was chief architect for a large multinational company. And when I first heard that title, I thought that sounded fancy AF. It really spoke to my vanity. I thought it was great, but it turns out that job is mostly just meetings. Lots of meetings. In fact, I run an application constantly on my computer to track my time, to help me stay focused, to help me be productive, to help me kind of keep track of what I do during the day. And you can see that about 70% of my time is meetings. So many meetings. I spend so much time in Microsoft Teams or offline or all of these things. And so, even though my job isn't as glamorous as I hoped that it would be based on how it sounded, it was the current phase of a 2-decade arc, and I'm doing the things that I've always wanted to do. And, it's been a journey, and I've learned a lot, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my career. But wherever you are in your career journey, and wherever it is you want to go, and I love the way Mark talked about this, that thinking like an architect doesn't require you to have a title. Just like in an organization, being a leader in your team, in your organization, has nothing to do with what your title is. I'm going to share some of the things that I've learned in my career, from an office temp to chief architect to, doing what I've always wanted to do, again, as an independent consultant, independent creator. And, when we look at the difference between junior and senior, and again, I love the way Mark covered this in the keynote this morning about your technical breadth and technical depth. But I believe it's more than that. I think your technical breadth and technical depth are very key. But the differentiators between a junior developer and a senior developer, or an architect and a mid-level developer, or any of these things, it's not just code. And I joined a team once, and I remember we had a wide variety of skills in the development team. We had people who were very, very skilled, and we had newer developers that made a lot of the common mistakes that newer developers would make. And we started doing code reviews. We started practicing pair programming, strong style pair programming. And within about a month and a half, 6 weeks, those junior developers are writing code every bit as good as the senior developers. And what's more, the senior developers were learning things from the junior developers, and we didn't think that was going to be possible. Because, every generation comes in with there are things that I learned that are no longer relevant, that I still carry with me. That if you're a younger, newer generation of developers, you have an entirely different perspective on. You see things, a lot has changed since, like, you're learning JavaScript. I learned JavaScript in the 90s when it was running in Netscape. And so I still have baggage, and I still do things the old way sometimes. I have to consciously catch myself. And the junior developers say, well, why are you using var? We don't do that anymore. What? Oh. We're all learning and we're all growing. But it wasn't that's not the differentiator anymore. And in fact, a lot of the stuff that we did at my last position, we used a lot of code generators. And today, there's even more available to us with things like Copilot and GPT and all of this. And it's not the code, it's how we think, it's how we work together, and it's how we communicate. And, we talk about technical breadth, and we talk about technical depth. But I believe that your technical skills are just the ante. If we use poker as a metaphor, your ante is the bet that you have to place before you even get into the game. It's the first bet you place before anybody would deal you any cards. That ante is a small bet. It gets you into the game, but all it does is get you into the game. Everything that happens from that point forward depends on everything else you bring to the table. And whatever these other skills that we have, these soft skills, these transferable skills, whatever you want to call them, these are how we create value as technologists. I love this quote from Tudor Gerbeau, who's a really interesting individual who lives out in Switzerland, who's trying to completely rethink the way that we interact with code. He says, the value that we create as software engineers isn't technical. The value that we create isn't technical. And I love this line. And sometimes we overemphasize the technical. But again, there's so many other elements that are valuable here. We use technology to solve the problem, so the solution is often technical, but the value is not. The value is when you solve problems. And I told you there'd be a test here. So what are these 6 things? I'm going to start with this, an idea that's been percolating in my head for a number of years, about 8 years. 2015, I wrote a talk, and the title of the talk was Value-Driven Development. And basically, changing the way we think about the problems that we're trying to solve. What is the value that we're trying to deliver? And I really spent a lot of time exploring some of these ideas. It's a 90-minute talk, but I'm going to share a few key highlights with you. And it started with a realization of just how difficult it is to deliver value, or to even recognize the value that we deliver. When I look back on my career, I realized that I knew almost nothing about the business domains that I wrote software in. It just worked out that way. Hey, we need a C# developer. That's me. And I go in, and the product owner says, hey, we need a button. And when you click the button, it puts the foo into the bar. I can code that up. Looks good. Ship it. And off it goes. And I don't know why we need to put the foo into the bar. I don't know why we need that button. But the product owner told me to do it. I coded it up, and off we ship it. And I had very little realization. At one point, about 12 or 13 years ago, I worked for a company where we were building e-discovery software. I didn't even know what e-discovery was. It has something to do with lawyers and lawsuits. I still don't really know. But we built this software, and we ended up hiring this young individual. And he was a second-year law student, who, when he was doing a summer internship at a law firm, he realized that all the law stuff wasn't that interesting for him. What was interesting was writing all these little scripts and utilities to configure a doc review platform. And 2 years in law school, he says, you know what? I think I'd rather work with computers. I think I'd rather be a software engineer. So we hired this kid, and he joined our team because he had legal domain expertise, and he had software domain expertise, and this would be a lot of value. And I was showing him our product. And I'm like, yeah, you do this, and that does that, and this other thing does this other thing. And I'm just reeling off these features very matter of fact. And he's sitting next to me, and he is almost giddy with excitement. He is sitting there hopping up and down. He is giggling. He says, oh my gosh, you have no idea how useful this would have been when I was doing doc review at this law firm. This is so amazing. This is so cool. This would have saved me hours of time. This would have made this whole process so much less painful. And it was one of the first times that I ever got to see in somebody's face the difference that my software made, the value that I gave in their lives. And it's a really hard thing to do. It's really hard to even put ourselves in those shoes. So as you know, I'm also a professional magician. And many years ago, when I decided I wanted to work very seriously as a professional and work at a professional full-time level, I realized that it's really hard. It's not enough just to know some magic tricks. You have to know how to book yourself and sell yourself and organize things and schedule things. And I did what any software engineer would do. I threw code at the problem. I built an application. And I thought, this is going to be easy. Because it's not some obscure, to me, legal thing about responsive documents and litigation process and discovery and clawback and blah, blah, blah. This is what I know. This is what I live. In other words, in other words, I'm the developer. I'm the customer. Because the realization when we look at this idea of value is, how we define value as software engineers, different to how the team typically defines it. We have different perspectives. We have different ideas. It's different for the team than it is for the customer. And the customer's perspective and value is different from the business, right? They all have different things. And so if we're going to be effective, we have to have an understanding of each of these perspectives. And they're often trade-offs, but it really boils down to this. If you're solving the problems of the business and the customer, you're creating value. And when I'm creating something so valuable that they're sitting next to me giggling, that's a good feeling to be in. If you're creating value, I think it's safe to say you are solving problems. But how well do we understand the customer? And this is what I was getting at, just slightly out of sequence. I have, apparently have a mental race condition today, and everything's out of sequence. But I had this challenge, and I did what anybody would do. I threw code at the problem, and I thought, this is going to be easy. This is going to be so much easier than writing e-discovery software or, software for an ERP for a business that I don't really understand. I'm a magician. I book my own show, so when I went and created this thing called Showbiz CRM, I thought, this will be easy, because I'm the customer. I know exactly what I want. Of course, I'm also the developer, which means that I have some biases and some other perspective that's probably going to conflict with all of that. I'm also the business owner, and I want this little endeavor to turn a profit. Spoiler, it didn't. It did not make me rich. But even though I knew everything that I wanted the software to do, I wrote some user stories. Decided I was going to do it all right. And I wrote user stories like this. As a busy professional entertainer, I want the ability to predefine a series of steps that I can trigger to run automatically so that I can set and forget common and tedious tasks that run on a schedule. And I built this. They say that developers designed the best user interfaces. Yeah, I built this, I designed this, and I don't know what this is doing. But here's the thing. As a developer, it worked. I could check off all the functional requirements, ship it, call it a day. And as a user, it worked, for me, because I know where, as they say, the bodies are buried. I know if you click on this thing, it's going to blow up, so you just don't click on it. I mean, how hard is that for the customers to understand? Not so much for the other users. And consequently, as a business, it failed. It was a very embarrassing, frustrating, and very expensive failure for me. But, I created very little value despite filling out all of the functional requirements. But, and this is what I want you to remember, at least the architecture was cool. At its peak, this is before containers, this is before orchestration. This is when we were doing all this stuff in VMs, and there were no auto-scaling cloud platforms. I had to roll my own. At its peak, Showbiz CRM had 12 daily active users. 3 of them were me. My regular account, my admin account, my test account. Now, although I tested this, if simultaneously 100,000 users all kicked off one of these automation sequences at the same time, those requests would go into a queue, processing machines would be spun up almost instantaneously. The only latency I had was the boot time of the VM, and before I know it, those 100,000 requests could be processed in parallel in a matter of seconds, and then those processing machines would decommission, and we'd scale back down to a single instance. I did this once, and this is the response I got. I got the slow clap. It was too hard to use. It did everything it was supposed to do, but I couldn't put myself in the customer's shoes. I didn't create a lot of value. So I tried again. As a busy professional entertainer who's not especially technically savvy, I want the ability to predefine a series of steps that I can trigger and run automatically so that I can set and forget common and tedious tasks that run on a schedule. And I built this. Arguably better. Right? You can see what's going on. You can visualize it. You can think about it. It was the exact same features, but putting myself in the shoes of the customer, I delivered different value. Now, there was still a problem. I demoed this. It demoed very well. Customers got excited. They said, oh, I want this. I need this. This is wonderful. And then they bought it. They call me up or they email me and say, so I have this software. What do I do with it? And I say, you put your business process into it and you'll streamline and automate where appropriate. And they look at me like an animal on the train tracks might look at an oncoming train, just like, business process? Yeah, your business process. Right? You're a business, you have a process, it's your business process. No, they did not understand this. I said, okay, well, how sometimes you're on a project and you don't have a BA, so you have to put your BA hat on, and then you A the B and put that into the C? No? Okay. And then 30 days later, I get an email. It says, subscription billing cancellation notification. Because I didn't know where to start with this. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I call that trying to launch a startup. One more time. As a busy professional entertainer who's not especially technically savvy and doesn't aspire to be a business analyst, I want the ability to predefine a series of steps that I can trigger to run automatically so that I can set and forget common and tedious tasks to run out of schedule. And I built this. It's a compose window with a send later button. And they love it. They're like, this is great. I can write my pre-show check-in right when I book it, and I can schedule it to go out 2 days before the show. Or you could automate this. No. They understand that. And that's what blew my mind. It was fewer features, but the most value. And most value by far. And it was only through understanding that the value and the priority changed. And ever since then, I have thought about the software not by the features, not by the requirements, but by the value that I want to deliver with this software. Because it doesn't matter if we're writing an app or a library or an API. Software serves people. And whatever it is, it should make somebody's life better in some way. And it doesn't matter if your customer is another developer or 100 million people on your app or the consumer of your API. Think about the value that we deliver. In other words, solve problems. Now, if you want to go deeper into this topic, by the way, I've linked a recording of the entire presentation. If you want to watch that video, I've got a link at the end. Number 2, and I talked about this a little bit on the keynote yesterday. Problem space thinking. Start with the right questions. Instead of starting with the answer, start with the questions. And a lot of this really just comes down to how we approach problems. And if we think about the value of the solutions that we deliver, it drives us towards a more value-centric approach. But we still have the deck stacked against us. I'm going to give you another example. Have you ever been in a job interview and you've had a question like this on a whiteboard? I've been asked this question exactly twice in my life. I believe this question is almost, but not quite entirely useless, to paraphrase Douglas Adams. So the first time I got asked this question, I was very young. I'd only been in the industry a couple of years. And I walk in to this really hot interview room. I'm wearing a suit that doesn't fit me. I just feel uncomfortable. And the interviewer says, well, thank you for taking the time to join us, Michael. We have a quick coding challenge for you before we get on with the main interview. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll give you about 15 minutes and I'll come back and then we'll start the interview. Oh, okay, and the door shuts. This was back in the day There were no iPhones. Was no 5G, 4G, 3G, Edge. We didn't even have wap.google.com over GPRS, if anybody is that old in the wireless space. Probably just me. I had to do this off the top of my head, and I can't remember. Holding this marker, sweating in this interview room. I can't remember which one's a quick sort. So in my mind, I'm casting my mind back. When I was in school one day, I came into class, and the teacher had wheeled a TV into the room on a big cart. I'm like, oh, it's got to be that day. And we watched videos that day, and there was a group. You can find these online now on YouTube. But it was one of these groups, and I don't know what country they were based out of. It was some Eastern European country, I think. And what they would do is they would wear traditional folk clothes, and they would dance traditional folk dances to traditional folk music in their region, but they would dance sorting algorithms. So they'd be lined up on the stage, and everybody had a number on them, and the music would start, and two of them would step forward and bow, and they'd say, oh, you're a 5 and I'm a 7. So they'll, change places and step back, and then the next two would step forward. They'd do a bubble sort or something. And they did all of them, a heap sort, a merge sort, a hash sort, a shuffle sort, They never did a BOGO sort. If you haven't seen that one, that's the longest, that's the worst performing sort. It's like n factorial or something like that. It's a really bad sort. I think it's a joke. But they did all these sorts, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, and then it was, okay. Could be that, no, that's a bubble sort. No, that's definitely a merge sort. And so I finally picked one, and I start writing code on the whiteboard, and I finish just as the interviewer walks in. And he takes one look at the whiteboard, one look at me, and says, well, I think we have everything we need. We'll be in touch. Thank you for your time. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. I was devastated. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, oh, we have everything we need. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. No, you won't. Can you at least tell me what I did wrong? And he says two things. First of all, that's a heap sort. I guessed wrong. And he said, secondly, that won't compile. I said, of course it won't compile. It's a whiteboard. I almost quit IT. I'm like, I'm going back to do magic at TGI Fridays. They appreciate me. But the second time that I got asked this question, I approached it very differently. Same thing on a whiteboard. This is years later. And I got the question. And he says, write a quicksort function to sort an array of n integers. And I said, you know what? I got this. It won't take me long at all. I grabbed the marker and I wrote arrays.sort. That was not what they were expecting. It was like a needle scratched across this guy's brain. He just crashed. He froze. He beach balled for 2 minutes. You can't do that. I think I just did. He says, he says, first of all, no, because arrays.sort is a heap sort. I'm like, every time. Arrays.qsort. There we go, problem solved. And he says, no, I need you to write it out. Longhand. I said, why? Tell me why. What is the value that you're getting from this question? He says, I need to know you're qualified for this job. I said, this job? Isn't this the job where you're looking for a developer to maintain an internal CRUD MVC web app? This job? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I got my wires crossed. This job, this is the job, that's right. This is the job where we're making libraries for developers in the 1980s. He says, no, we're doing the CRUD MVC web app. I said, this is all I'm ever going to do. And I'm afraid to work with anybody who wouldn't. But, it took me a long time to figure out why people ask questions like this. Do you know why they ask questions like this? Because these are the questions that Google asks. It's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. These are the questions that Amazon asks. Now, as cool as it would be to solve some of the problems that are unique to companies as large as Google or Amazon, that's not most of us. And their interview process may or may not be well calculated to find people that are specifically talented for their little niche. But really, just doing it because that's what Google does or what Microsoft does or what Amazon does is backwards thinking. It's starting in the solution space. That's what they're doing, so that's what we should do. It's the embodiment of backwards thinking. It's a microcosm. And this happens. This happened to me. I remember when I was younger, I got this book. I've been doing it. I read this book. I've been doing it all wrong. I've been doing it all wrong. I need to use patterns. Not only do I need to use patterns, I found a way to work every single pattern into the next project that I built. Every single one of them. This is going to be a singleton. I'm going to use the visitor pattern here. And, this could be an observer, and so on and so on and so on. It didn't really accomplish any of the goals these patterns were set out. I was going from the pattern. I was making the patterns fit the problem rather than by starting with the problem and choosing patterns that are the solutions to the problem. I had this quote yesterday in my keynote. Start with the question and let that drive the answer, not the other way around. Einstein says that if he had an hour to solve a problem and his life depended on it, he would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. As an industry, if we had a problem to solve, we'll spend 60 minutes thinking about solutions, typically. Now, this is an elite group. I say this because you're here, and you're here. Thank you for being in my session, because there are many to choose from. But this is a problem we have to overcome. And I think of the immortal words of Michael Jackson, not that one, but this one, when he talks about problem frames. He tries to flip the script, because if you think about it, in so much of our education, we are taught solutions and patterns. And then we go out in the real world where we don't deal with solutions, we deal with problems. But because our emphasis for so long has been so backwards, a lot of times we just have a whole bunch of solutions in search of a problem rather than having a clear understanding of a problem and letting that drive us to the solution. So Michael Jackson, who's been around quite a while in the software engineering, computer science space, came up with this idea of problem frames, which is essentially the opposite of a solution or a design pattern. So a problem frame describes a recognizable class of problems, a class of problems with a known solution. There's language, there's like framework to identify problems from the language of the requirements. And if you've got a recognized class of problems, we call that a problem frame. Because in reality, in the work that we do come across many of the same problems over and over again. And it can be very useful to have a category of common problems and say, oh, this is a variation of that problem, rather than this would be a good opportunity to use all of the patterns. And it's, it really comes down to getting to the point of what the problems we're actually trying to solve for the customer. Or if I'm interviewing architects for my last team, when I interview architects, one of the questions I would ask was, what's the best architecture? And just see what they come back with, because often they'll say, oh, microservices, hands down. Oh, really? And then I would come up with some of the stuff that Mark Richards would come up with, and really kind of challenge that. So what I do with the interview candidates, I do architecture katas. But I love this because it starts at the center of it is solving problems. Now, the third one here is communication. How we communicate with our teams, how we communicate with our customers. And this is one of those things that I really wish I understood, because one of the hardest things that it is for us to do is communicate with the business. And Neil Ford said this in his talk earlier today. He said, the business isn't going to learn our language. We need to learn the language of the business. And whether we're moving into a senior role or especially into an architecture role, I'm going to borrow this idea from Nate Shuda. We need to be the organizational Rosetta Stone. We have to speak business to the business people, finance to the finance people, and technology to the technology people. We have to bridge all of these groups to make sure that we're aligned in purpose and we are aligned in direction. And one of the most important skills that I've developed in my career is the ability to speak the language of the business. Because when you're moving to a senior level or to an architect level, really you're shifting from what you might call hired help to a trusted advisor. And too often, software engineers have really good ideas, but they frame them to the business in terms of the value it delivers for the engineer. Hey, you know, if we switch to this framework, it would make my job so much easier. I'm sorry, the business doesn't care about making your job easier. In fact, they say, you know what, we pay you a lot of money to do a hard job, and you want to make it easier? The cheek. Instead, you want to reframe this in terms of the value to the business. And it's gonna, and just like Mark talked about, it's gonna mean different things to different people. Like if one of your business people, their hot button, the thing they get excited about is speed to market. Well, instead of framing it how it's going to make your job easier, frame how your job easier is going to get products to market faster. Hey, well, there's two ways to do this thing. We could do it the way we've always done it, which, you know, don't rock the boat, and we can get this out in about 3 months. Or we could invest 2 weeks making some changes, and then I can get this feature to market in another 3 weeks. So 5 weeks versus 12 weeks. And now which one we do, that's a business decision. And this business person is going to say, well, why aren't we doing the 5-week thing? I know, right? But it's a completely different conversation. So I did an entire talk a while back about how to optimize your communication. So when you're making a case, how do you make your case optimally? And in fact, I've got a link to the full 60 or 90-minute recording of this talk where I go through all of these principles of influence and all of these different ways to make your case optimally. Because you will be more or less successful depending on how you frame it, how you approach it, how you time it, and the work you put in advance to be persuasive in an organization. But these are the skills. You know, when I first gave this talk on the principles of influence and the principles of persuasion, somebody said, this almost sounds like a sales talk. We're developers. And I said, yes. And every single developer is going to have different ideas on how to solve this problem. And everybody, the management, is going to have different reasons for not wanting to go with your ideas. You have to be persuasive with your ideas. You have to communicate these things in a way that is going to make them more likely to happen. So this is a valuable, valuable talk, and I've got a recording at the end. Number 4 is time management. And Mark talked about this again during the keynote this morning. That we don't have all of the time, and we have all of this competing pressure. But we need to grow, we need to learn. And Mark gave a great strategy. That 20 to 30 minutes every day with your morning tea, your morning coffee, and just carving out and protecting that time. But through the rest of our day as well. Right? There are emails coming in, there are Slacks and team messages. There are so many meetings. How many people still are in, might have been all working together before the pandemic and you're still scattered, some remote, some in offices, things like that? Yeah, so quite a bit of us. You know what I learned with the pandemic is nobody has any idea how to operate a distributed team. Because there's magic that happens in hallway conversations, during lunch breaks. where you run up to somebody and say, hey, do you have a second? Let's just jump in front of a whiteboard. There's magic that happens when you've got a few smart, passionate people in front of a whiteboard hashing out a problem. And we didn't know how to recreate this. And the business people didn't know how to recreate this. So we just scheduled more and more and more and more meetings. And it somehow never created any of the magic. And before you know it, you look at your calendar, and it's nothing but meetings. And one of the meetings is, why haven't you gotten more work done? Yeah. So a couple things that I've found very valuable. I practice personal Kanban. This is my Kanban board. My very lovely and talented wife created this for me. And it allows me to visualize my work. I can see everything that I have to do in terms of little magnetic cards that I stick up there. I can reprioritize them. I can see what I've got. I can see what my priorities are. And I also limit my work in progress. And both of these are really valuable tools. It allows me to keep a lid on everything that I'm doing. And it makes it easier. One of the things I have a hard time with is saying no. Somebody asks me to do something, and I'll say sure. Not because I have the capacity to do it, but because I want to be able to do that thing for that person. And then I do that. I say yes. And then not only have I overcommitted, I'm probably going to underdeliver. And I'm going to let myself down, I'm going to let them down, and I don't like that. When I've got this board, it makes it very easy for me to say, I'm fully committed, I wish I could. And I can just point to it. I have a physical Kanban board. Now, some people use electronic Kanban boards. How many people use Trello or something like that? Yeah. I don't. Nothing wrong with it, but for me, Trello just becomes yet another browser tab. And I don't know about you, I like my browser tabs like I like my coffee. Consumed to excess to the point that it makes me mildly anxious. So these things get lost. I have this, it's in my office, it's right next to my desk. It's basically, if I'm working here, my Kanban board's right there. But the thing that we have to do as we grow our technical breadth, as we grow our skills, as we grow our knowledge, in an ever noisier atmosphere, we have to commit to what Cal Newport calls deep work. And he defines deep work as the professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limits. These efforts create new value, they improve your skill, and they are hard to replicate. This is the value proposition of the 21st century knowledge worker. The ability to do this, the ability to focus, to be creative, and produce at an elite level. And these skills are becoming increasingly in demand. At the same time, they're becoming increasingly rare. Now, I asked developers, okay, this is what you want to do. What's in your way? Well, they say, well, the distracting work environment. And it doesn't matter if you're in the open plan office or you're at home with the family and the kids and all the distractions around the home. That's a challenge. On the bottom here, the second biggest slice is meetings. The third is all the non-dev work we have to do. The reports, the timesheets, the updates, the blah, blah, blah that we get given. And also just a lack of support from management. And more than half of this graph, almost 2/3 of it is what Cal Newport calls shallow work. Non-cognitively demanding, logistical style tasks that are often performed while distracted. These efforts tend not to create much new value in the world, and they are easy to replicate. And if that's 80% of our job, that means 80% of our job can be replicated easily. Deep work is rare, it is valuable, and it's meaningful. And so one of the things that we have to do as we manage our time is manage time away from the distractions, away from the chaos, away from the noise, to be able to do that deep work, even if it's just that 20 minutes a day. But even beyond just the learning and self-development, just the day-to-day work and the activities that we have to do, we have to be able to focus in on those. Now, Cal Newport talks about 4 ways to do this. Four deep work philosophies, as he calls the monastic, bimodal, rhythmic, and the journalist. The monastic is probably the most extreme. There's an example that he gives is computer science professor emeritus, I guess now, Donald Knuth, talks about why you can't email him. Because he says he got rid of his email address in 1990. He said 15 years of email was enough for him. I feel like he missed out on, the best times of email because it got so much worse after 1990. He says that he needs to focus for long hours with uninterruptible concentration, and email gets in the way. And if you need to get a hold of him, you can send him a letter, and he'll eventually get to it. That's nice. It's really hard to do, though, in any professional organization. If you disappear for weeks or months at a time, you're probably going to find you don't have a job anymore. This actually happened to me. I used to work in a company. I was in the IT office. I was a developer. I was an office systems developer. I sat right next to the help desk contact, which was a really bad place to be because the help desk guy was always out fixing printers or troubleshooting email or something like that. And every time somebody would walk down and they'd see he wasn't there, they would just turn to me. Maybe you can help. I'm like right in the middle of a hard programming problem, and it's just like, what? And by the time I explain that I don't know how a printer, I don't know what PC load letter means, I go back and it's like I have to restart everything. And I got frustrated, so I'm like, I have this thing in the server room I got to do. So I go in the server room, open the door, and oh, it felt good. The only room in the office with air conditioning. Felt so good, so I sat down. There was a chair in there, and there was a machine in there. I thought, I think I'm just going to spend the rest of the day in here where it's air conditioned and nice and cool. And I worked the rest of the day. Nobody bothered me because nobody can get in. It's like 3 of us have badge access. And the next day, I go straight in the server room, and I work all day. This goes on for a couple of weeks. Most productive I've ever been in my life. I get home one day, and I have a message on my answer machine. I play it. Hey, Michael. It's Jenny in HR. Hope you're doing well. Anyway, wanted to see if we could get together and talk at some point. I've got your last paycheck, and we've got some papers for you to sign, and be nice to have a quick conversation, ask you a couple questions. But whatever happens, I hope you're doing okay. Talk to you soon. Bye. What? I got fired. And it was like 6:30 now, and so it's too late. I'm calling. Nobody's at the office. I have to wait all night the next day, go in and try to unring that bell. I got my badge. It doesn't work. So I have to get an escort to the HR. And I said, what's going on? So, well, we noticed you haven't been in the office in over a month. Who do you think's been doing all my work? But I can not show up for over a month and not get fired. I'll file that away for later. But it was, so we talked about that, and, it went badly. We did get it figured out, but yeah, it's hard to do that in a normal environment. The second deep work style is the bimodal deep work style, where, you deal with the chaos and the hustle and bustle and on-call and the production issues and the meetings and everything, but occasionally you take periods out, a few days here, out of the month, to really get down deep work. The example that Cal Newport gives in his book, I highly recommend the book, by the way, is Carl Jung, who would be very active with his practice and cafe culture and everything in Vienna, but every couple of weeks he'd retreat for a period of time in his rustic stone cottage where he'd think and write and do his deep work. The third is the journalistic style of deep work, or the journalistic philosophy. The only person alive that I've ever seen pull this off is Dr. Venkat Subramaniam. All of us, everybody who knows him, we have no idea how that man is so prolific. It's because he follows this philosophy. He can get deep work anytime, any day. He's got a 30-minute cab ride. He's going to write half of a chapter of a book. Where we would take a break, he does deep work. I can't do that. But if you can, that's an amazing way to work. For most of us, it is the rhythmic deep work, where we block out a period of time every day, every so many days, every week to do our deep work, where we focus on whatever it is we need to focus on. So a tool that I use a lot is something called Rescue Time. It's a time tracker. It allows you to do a lot of, it tracks your time. It allows you to set goals. It's got a lot of useful features. But it's really interesting seeing where I'm most productive. And one thing, if you're like me, you'll see that I'm not very productive in the mornings. I'm not a morning person. I'm a firm believer there should not be 2 8 o'clocks in a day. But I'm very productive in the afternoon, evening. And so what I tend to do is I schedule my deep work for the afternoons. I keep my calendar open and unblocked. You want to have meetings, you want to have catch-ups, you want to have one-on-ones, you want to have whatever, great. We'll do it in the morning. I'll go through my emails all morning. I'll be available on Slack all morning. But in the afternoon, it's do not disturb. And in the evening, I go home, I shut down. Balance is so important. We need downtime. Downtime aids our insights. It allows us to recharge. And a lot of the work that we do in the evening usually isn't that important. And again, if you want to dive deeper into this topic, I have an entire 90-minute talk on time management, so definitely check that out. Finding Signal in the Noise, it's called, and I've got a link at the end if you want to watch that and dive deeper into this topic. But this is another key one, how we manage our time, how we manage our day, because there's so much that is demanded of us. Number 5 is empathy. Being able to, this might be one of the most important soft skills that you can have. Put yourself in the shoes of your colleagues. That's going to make your team more effective. It's going to make you more cohesive and make you better able to communicate. Put yourself in the shoes of the business people. It's going to make it so much easier to speak in a way that's going to resonate with them. Put yourself in the shoes of the customer. You're going to write better software. You're going to deliver more value. It's so key. The ability to empathize with other perspectives is vital. I always say sympathy is feeling for. Empathy is feeling with. I get it. I feel you. And without empathy, we talk about value, we can't gauge value. Not only that, but value can and will change over time. And this is why it's so important, because as we're trying to make decisions, as we're empathizing with all of these different perspectives, we have to deal with these conflicts. And one of the ways that I settle these conflicts is I ask a question. Does the user care? How is which decision, this one or that one, going to make the user's, the customer's life better? In other words, are you solving their problems? It really comes back to that over and over and over again. And this also goes back to, this even connects back to what Mark was talking about in the keynote this morning about making decisions. What are the drivers? Well, they're the drivers that we care about as engineers, as technologists, but it's what does the business care about? And how do we look at things from that perspective? And how do we translate that into the architectural characteristics or anything else? There's a lot of value in that. And the last one is just curiosity. So I gave the whole keynote yesterday about developing your breadth, not even just your technical breadth, but your breadth as a human being and how valuable that is. I gave that example of how Steve Jobs, following his curiosity and dropping into these random classes, made him a better product leader. That Claude Shannon, following his curiosity and taking a philosophy course, made his entire career, earned him a Turing Award essentially by the time he finished grad school, because he followed his curiosity and he was able to connect ideas from very distant domains and find new solutions to problems. It's so important to kind of cultivate that breadth and find yourself as a well-rounded human being. Because, and again, there's a whole keynote on that topic from yesterday, and I hope you got to see it because I want to be mindful of time. Otherwise, I'll repeat a lot of these same themes. But so much value in following your curiosity, following your intuition, and encouraging this in our teams as well. I think this is a vital approach to developing ourselves. And all of these are going to be linked here at the end. In fact, this is all I have for you on the topic. If you've got questions, you can reach out. You can find me at michael@magician.codes or at michaelcarducci@mastodon.social. But for anybody who is curious, I've got all of these further resources right here. I thank you so much for your time, so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the day.